You've probably seen this meme format countless of times in the past 2 months or so. If you haven't, then at the very least, you've heard of the music being played in the background. That's Your New Home, a song featured in the end of the amazing digital Circus pilot, which blew up. Like, it really did blew up. Okay, so what about this song? Or this song? Well, both of them are from Undertale, which obviously needs no introduction. So, what is the correlation between the two examples I've just mentioned? Well, boys and girls, they both are a part of original soundtracks from indie projects. What makes them so unique and so recognizable? Well, in today's video, we're going to discuss just that, the hidden art of indie soundtracks. So, sit back, tell your cult to grab some batteries to eat, and let's get right into it.
Please look out for me. Can you set me free? Will you take my soul away? Casting me in cold, bury me in bones, rest eternally. Will you take me home? Can we see the moon again? Dancing in the dark till we fall apart. I can't end this dream.
So what do I really mean by the hidden art of indie soundtracks? I don't know, I just wanted a cool catchy name, I guess. No, but seriously, what I meant by indie soundtracks are the OSTs of different indie IPs, like indie games,
Alone at the end.
and indie shows, specifically animated ones. So let me give you a refresher on what I mean by indie. I'm talking about projects that were made by one person or a group of ordinary people who create their stuff independently. So no big funding from companies and just themselves. Now, going back to the title, when we're trying to find a great, original, and unique product within the sea of creativity and degeneracy known as the internet, it truly is a grueling task to find one. And when you do find one that checks all the criteria mentioned, oh boy does it feel good. Especially when you realize they were made by a small group of people and actually gets praise. Indie OSTs are something that people already listen to frequently, such as the songs from the aforementioned Undertale soundtrack. But people often forget that those songs were mostly made by just one guy, Toby Fox, who also made the entire franchise. What I'm trying to dig up here is how these soundtracks were so masterfully created to set its respective scenes' atmosphere, and how a lot of them were just created by one or two musicians, yet they could have come from AAA titles or something of that scale. Now I'm going to split the video into two parts: soundtracks in indie games and soundtracks in indie animated projects. All set? Alright.
Music in video games play a huge role in setting the scene to feel just the way the developer intended it to be, whether it's a fast-paced, adrenaline-fueled action scene, tranquil and laid-back gameplay, or heavily emotional moments to bawl your eyes out to. Scenes like these wouldn't feel the same without a fitting soundtrack to go with them. Let's take a look at some of the more popular indie titles that have taken the gaming community by storm. Hollow Knight is arguably one of the best Metroidvania games to come out, with its intricate yet captivating story, which is told via environmental storytelling and character interactions rather than spoon-feeding everything to you directly. It's unique, hand-drawn 2D art style that pairs well with the dark subterranean world of Hallownest. And most importantly, a stunningly superb soundtrack composed by Christopher Larkin that I feel doesn't get enough praise. When we first get dropped into the game, literally, we don't get much music, apart from the few piano keys being pressed at the beginning. It remains this way up until we reach the first settlement, the quaint, quiet, and eerily empty village of Dirtmouth. The soundtrack that plays is a melancholic piece that features a piano paired with a violin. The song has this frequently repeating motif where the pitch goes up for 3 beats and goes down at the 4th, played by the piano. Then comes the violin, playing the same pattern. And in the bass, there is this constantly repeating arpeggio, played by the piano. This piece really does help to represent Dirtmouth, a fading town whose residents have all left except for one. Well, technically there's more, but they're kinda out of town for the time being. As you progress, you will then be greeted by the first boss fight of the game, the False Knight. This piece is fast and energetic, as any boss fight should be. The soundtrack starts off with a repetitive pattern of notes that stay relatively the same pitch, before going down an octave, then going back up. While in the bass section, there's a constantly repeating ascending arpeggio of 3 octaves. Both of these put together help to create a feeling of tenseness. Overall, this piece does an extravagantly excellent job at being what it's supposed to do, intense boss fight music. There are a plethora of other great soundtracks that the game has to offer, from epic, fast-paced combat music to absolutely gorgeous sounding ambience. I highly recommend listening to the official soundtrack on your own, as no words I can utter are able to do justice to the soundtrack when compared to listening to it firsthand. Cult of the Lamb, a settlement builder colony sim that's also a dungeon crawler roguelike. It has an adorable and light-hearted art style, fast-paced gameplay when dungeon crawling and more laid-back when managing your cult colony, in conjunction with, surprise surprise, a bombastically banger soundtrack created by Riverboy, also known as Narayana Johnson. Some of the identifying features of Cult of the Lamb soundtracks is that they have a heavy emphasis on percussion, especially in the dungeon and boss fight soundtracks. As well as heavy usage of the soprano choir. What I like about the Cult of the Lamb soundtrack is how unique it is. Play any soundtrack from the game and I'll bet I know it's from the game. While the game combines 2 very contrasting genres together in terms of pacing, that being a roguelike and a settlement builder, the music does a fantastic job in matching the sections it's in. The settlement builder section soundtracks are really chill. Just take a listen to this. And this. You can hear the distinct soprano voice as well as the marimba that's played in a lot of these soundtracks, which I feel like is very reminiscent of church choir music. It feels very sinister, but in a more chill way, if you get what I mean. It really fits the cult vibe that the game is going for. Another thing I want to focus on is the combat music. The soundtracks do a great job in setting the fast-paced dungeon crawling mood. As stated earlier, there's a lot of emphasis on the percussion side of the ensemble. Take one of the boss fight themes, Leshy, for example. You can hear the electric snare, bass, and timpani, and paired with the guitar makes for a pretty neat soundtrack. Another boss fight theme that I want to mention is Calamar. The soundtrack features this really catchy synth riff, where it's the same octave being played in triplets, as well as this part with the flute. Cult of the Lamb soundtrack is, for lack of a better word, banger. The fast-paced music complements the roguelike gameplay greatly, while still having tracks that are more chill and laid back for the colony management part of the game. While not as varied as Hollow Knight's soundtrack, I also recommend listening to the Cult of the Lamb soundtrack. Yeah, you know what this is. Undertale is a masterpiece of RPG history, created by the legendary Toby Fox. The game's influence has spread far across the internet. While the game is most known for its intricate lore, gameplay, and the multiple endings it has, one other thing it's known for by many is its soundtrack. One thing about the Undertale soundtrack that is interesting is its frequent use of leitmotifs. For those who don't know, leitmotifs are specific usage of motifs, where a pattern of notes are used in association to a character, place, or idea. And oh man, does Undertale have a lot of leitmotifs. And I mean a lot, to the point where there's an entire fandom wiki page dedicated to the leitmotifs found in the game. Leitmotifs serve an important role in associating different soundtracks from the game to a main theme. For example, Flowey's theme leitmotif, Your Best Friend, is used in a number of other soundtracks, such as in Your Best Nightmare, Hopes and Dreams, Save the World, Finale, and Last Goodbye. With each of the aforementioned soundtracks having some relation to Flowey. Leitmotifs play a huge part in Toby Fox's work, to the point where a lot of his soundtracks are mostly just remixes of other soundtracks, using the leitmotif of it as its basis. You know this theme, right? This is the main theme of Undertale, called Once Upon a Time. And guess what? Its leitmotif has been used in a whopping 17 soundtracks, them being Start Menu Full, Home, Music Box, Hotel. Can you really call this a hotel? I didn't receive a mint on my pillow or anything. Undertale, The Choice, Fallen Down, Reprise, Hopes and Dreams, Save the World, Final Power, technically, Reunited, Bring It In Guys, Last Goodbye, Good Night, and Before the Story from PS4. Other than the leitmotifs, the soundtracks themselves are absolutely astounding. From the location themes to the battle music, it's all fire. There's a reason why the soundtracks have so much influence on the internet. The soundtracks range from being very memeable, very epic, or really nostalgic. And don't even get me started on Deltarune. Indie games are home to some of the best game soundtracks out there in my opinion. Developers put their heart and soul into developing their games, and having soundtracks to go with the gameplay just adds the finishing touch. I'd go even more in depth with a bigger roster of games, but I don't really have enough time.
And I have 300 confirmed kills.
Indie animated shows are having somewhat of a renaissance as of recent. You know, you had stuff like Ed's World in the late 2000s, which still is an absolute classic that deserves the praise it gets. Now you have more recently emerged indie animated shows and pilots, with the most popular being The Amazing Digital Circus. But we also got two other projects, one being a pilot and the other being an ongoing series, them being Lackadaisy and Murder Drones respectively. The three of them are, as of now, the most anticipated and not hated, indie animations, especially after heavy promotion through events like Glitch X.
What did you just say about me, you little bitch?
Let's first talk about a pilot to a show that is an animated adaptation of a beloved webcomic, Lackadaisy.
In the spirit of... Would you? In the spirit of discovery!
The story takes place in Prohibition-era St. Louis, where three smugglers, or bootleggers, I don't know if that's what they're called in the wiki, Rocky, Freckle, and Ivy, try to smuggle some alcohol. They get into trouble, and the pilot ends with them successfully escaping the rival gang. Of course, that's just a story in a nutshell, so if you want to get the full picture, go watch the pilot. It's only half an hour long. Right, the soundtrack. Since the whole pilot takes place in the 1920s, you're definitely gonna hear a lot of swingy, jazzy music thingy. Yeah. And you know what? There isn't much music to begin with. After the section with Rocky's poem, which has him playing his violin with a bit of orchestration and effects to accompany the bright imagery the scene is showing, we get a few minutes of the trio just messing around while trying to smuggle their stuff with no music, but what we get is just ambience that shows the emptiness of the cold night in the graveyard. Then, we get a chase sequence where Rocky's violin returns, but rather than a calm orchestra accompanying the melody, there's an upbeat jazzy rhythm that really shows the intensity of the situation, even having electrical elements in it? Damn, I need to find out what the name of the genre is. Ah yeah, electro swing. We then cut the music for the next few minutes to have a showdown between the three protagonists and antagonists, with most of the background being, again, ambience of the cold and quiet night. Fun fact, one of the protagonists, Rocky, is voiced by Michael Kovac. I just wanted to point that out because his voice acting in this scene is excellent, and definitely not because of anything else. Moving on, we're then brought into the Lackadaisy speakeasy, yes, that's what they're called, and then we have some conversations, blah blah blah, and then the closing music, back with that funky, swingy, and jazzy groove. Now what do I think of the whole soundtrack in this pilot? To be fair, as I've already mentioned, there isn't much to really talk about regarding the actual soundtrack. But Shafik, why would you mention Lackadaisy as an example of an indie animated film to have a great soundtrack in the first place? Well, one thing that Lackadaisy truly shines in is how the songs in the OST pairs really well with the ambience. Moreover, it prominently features a ton of electro swing, which is an absolute vibe to listen to, and is of course a homage to the time period the pilot takes place in, the 1920s, when swing was the most popular music being played at the time. So yeah, overall, the Lackadaisy soundtrack isn't the main selling point of the pilot, but it is something that, again, really does strengthen the already stellar sound design of the whole thing. Moving on to another far more popular animated pilot. Of course, I'm talking about The Amazing Digital Circus.
Ladies first. No, wait, why would I say that?
Yeah, I don't think I need to give any introduction for this one. The whole thing is really well known, but as a refresher, let me just give a short recap on the basic plot of the pilot. The story revolves around 6 people who have their consciousness transported into a video game called, you guessed it, The Amazing Digital Circus. We mostly follow our lead protagonist, Pomni, trying to find a way out of this vibrant and colorful hellscape to no avail. So, that's that. Again, go watch the show if you want to understand what I'm saying. It's only half an hour long, dude, come on. Unlike Lackadaisy, this pilot is filled to the brim with astonishingly well-produced music by Gooseworks and Evan Alderete. I don't know how to pronounce her name, I'm sorry. In the intro, you are hit with the main theme with its vibrant, playful, circus-like rhythm with a motif that will be prominent in other background music in the OST. Even as background music, a lot of them still follow the theme of being in a circus, like the different music playing during the intro sequence. Simple, yet charming. But if you noticed, the further the pilot progresses, the more sophisticated the music becomes, until it reaches the point where most of the instruments resemble an orchestra, especially during the reveal of Kaufmo the Clown becoming an abstracted mess. Horns, strings, choirs, you name it. You might think that the orchestra stops there, right? Hell no, it continues on for the rest of the pilot. Pomni's chase sequence, the scene where Jax, Kinger, and Gangle try to negotiate with the glowing queen to return Zubul. Oh wait, what's that? Jax is also voiced by Michael Kovac? That's a surprise. He made Jax sound like a laid-back a-hole rather than a power-hungry maniac like Rocky. Wow, what a talented voice actor. Maybe we'll see him again in another project. At the end of Pomni's Backrooms escape sequence, it is then revealed that she has stumbled into the void, and the whole orchestral arrangement here just swells with absolute beauty. The staccato horns really made it sound like a John Williams composition. The choir and strings harmonizing. Holy crap, this was all made by 2 people? After the whole Gloink and Backroom shenanigans, the gang were then reunited with Kane, bringing Pomni back to virtual reality. See what I did there? We then return to the simple, playful music like the beginning of the pilot, before it too fades into a single piano, playing the melody resembling the motif from the main theme song at the intro. After a few more bars, this whole song climaxes with the return of orchestral arrangements with more strings, more choirs, more winds, yeah, you get the point, making a dramatic end to a beloved pilot for an upcoming series. So let me get you straight. You heard these superb orchestral arrangements thinking they were actually from an orchestra? Nah dude, these were composed by 2 people. It's absolutely impressive how well made this whole soundtrack is. Having a cheerful vibe in the beginning, not out of place from something like a Mario game or Animal Crossing, then it slowly fades into something out of a Star Wars film.
You mean nah?
The variation this one OST has is insane. Quick note, the soundtrack of Digital Circus was one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video in the first place, because it really is mind-blowing how amazing it is. So that's that, a stellar soundtrack for a great pilot, and thankfully is very much appreciated by the amount of attention through memes and degeneracy this 30-minute animation generated. And of course I couldn't be more excited for the rest of the series. So, with the praise I'm giving towards this one pilot soundtrack, surely that's all, right? Nothing tops it? Well, from all the indie animated pilots and series on the internet, there's one show that won me with its soundtrack. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about no, I'm just kidding, it's Murder Drones.
Crashed and ruined everything. Spaceship Pilot. Origin story.
Yeah, I absolutely adore the show, and we'll probably make a video about it once the whole first season is out. The show that dives into the mind of an angsty outsider who befriends the same people who killed her own kind. Murder Drones is a breath of fresh air from the storytelling tropes you see in a lot of films, especially sci-fi centered ones. The main plot of the series revolves around an android girl, Uzi, who tries to end the Murder Drones massacre of her exoplanet's worker drones, who are supposedly deemed as runaway AI by their parent company. When Uzi was trying to get a power supply thingy or whatever from outside of a bunker with multiple doors that her dad designed to keep the remaining worker drones as safe, she stumbles upon a murder drone, and they had a scuffle, but she realized that they weren't much different after all. We then get introduced to other characters, V, J, and later on, Tessa, and the big bad of the first season, Sin, or the Absolute Solver. The show really presents itself as a horror comedy because it can actually be funny, and definitely horrific at other times. You also got romance, and as someone who is generally very cold towards it, I genuinely think it's alright and plays along with the plot well. Of course there's
I am! Uzi is! She's a kid, like us, V!
Oh boy, now is it obvious that I freaking love this show? Clear? Alright, the soundtrack. So, the soundtrack is mostly composed by AJ Despirito. Despirito? Rather than going through every song from each episode like I did during my analysis of the previous pilots, I'll just be quickly pointing out each episode's unique music, then giving my thoughts about them. Starting, of course, with the pilot. The first episode presents us with an interesting concept for an animated series. It's not perfect since there are some aspects in the pilot that were handled far better on later episodes, such as its pacing, the jokes, and even the animation. But soundtrack-wise, it's stellar. From the very first scene, we get a sci-fi mystery-esque melody before hyping it up to a heavy synth-driven song that reflects the atrocities that the murder drones commit towards their worker counterparts. The heaviness of this episode's soundtrack doesn't stop there, as it continues during the short fight between Uzi and N with quick snare hits and staccato notes. And yeah, N is voiced by Michael Kovac here too. I really just wanted to point out the fact that he voices all these characters with very different personalities is incredible, and pretty much solidifies how talented the man is. During this chase sequence where N slaughters workers, we get a choir-focused track before slowing down after we get a scene where Uzi's dad decides to cower away. Just piano notes with some additional synths in the background, and for the final battle sequence, we get a very synth-heavy rendition of the main theme. With the pilot out of the way, the rest of the series' soundtracks are mostly based on what was already given in the pilot. The second episode does have a unique track in the intro sequence with N, V, and J in a mansion, seemingly taking place in a flashback. Rather than the bombastic electro music we expected, it's just a slow yet eerie violin and piano-led track with additional string arrangements in the background. And not to worry, we're gonna get more of these slower tracks as we progress through the series. The rest of the tracks in this episode are similar to the ones in the pilot, but with a lot more polish. Same goes with the other aspects that the pilot had some issues with. In the third episode, we still continue with the overall vibe tracks from the previous episodes had, until the certified banger that is the knife fight sequence. During the whole prom scene, there's this dance music that plays, sometimes with choirs appearing and even the original theme's melody, up until a knife hits the DJ mixer thingy. I seriously don't know what it's called. And the music fades into an unapologetically synth-heavy track, and holy crap, it's absolutely fire. You also got this fast-paced melody playing, and then this short clip right here hooked me up to watch the rest of this show instantly. Moving on, the fourth episode doesn't really have any notable tracks, but the first half, before the whole massacre of Uzi's classmates happened, does have actual calming sounding tracks like Camping.mp3 with its acoustic arrangement that gives a feeling of, well, going on a camping trip. On a side note, me and Zako agreed that it literally sounds like a track from Bluey. Yes, the Bluey. Later in the episode, we get a track with a leitmotif that appears every time Uzi and N have an emotional moment, which is prominently featured in the scene where both of them were falling from the sky. Alright, the fifth episode. Remember the more classical feel of that track from the beginning of the second episode? Yeah, this episode's tracks are mostly like that. A lot of these tracks have this royal medievalish vibe, like the one heard in The Human Gala, with its harpsichord, strings, and piano. Or the piano track that plays a melody reminiscent of a classical piece. The only times the soundtrack from this episode leans back into the synth-driven side of things are during moments like the end where Sin takes control of all the drones in the mansion, but even then, the synths are a lot more subtle than usual. The one track that feels like an actual Murder Drones track is the one that plays when Uzi and Doll have a brief brawl with an added layer of choirs. And so we reach the final episode, so far, Dead End. This episode's soundtrack is unique like no other episodes before it. There are a lot of tracks that feel far more ambient driven to focus on the slower pace of the episode. Even when we are hit with the traditional Murder Drone synth tracks, they were produced to sound far more cinematic than tracks from previous episodes. After the whole fight with the Jurassic Park inspired Sentinels, the gang are cornered with V having to make the ultimate sacrifice where the music swells with strings, not in a tense way but more like an emotional way, as she says,
Uzi, I trust you.
before cutting the wire of the elevator and salutes the surviving trio and seemingly gets killed by the sentinels. While all of this is playing, the strings get more somber before it transitions into one of my favorite tracks that came from a movie or a series ever, Eternal Dream, with vocals done by Uzi's voice actress Elsie Lovelock. Wow, this song is absolutely amazing. We do hear snippets of it throughout the episode, especially during the more ambient sounding tracks, but now we hear it in full clarity with it sounding very much like a song from a James Bond movie.
Till we fall apart, I can't end this dream.
And that's Murder Drones. Holy crap, I said a lot for that one, didn't I? Other than the fact that I love the show, the soundtrack itself has a lot to offer. We see the music become far more sophisticated in line with how the series progresses. Just like Lackadaisy and Digital Circus, I absolutely can't wait for more of this show, which will be the season finale next year, and what the soundtracks have in store for us. Well, that's that. The hidden art of indie soundtracks. I'm sure that after watching this video, a lot of you would realize how incredible it is that these independently made games and films have astonishingly well-produced soundtracks, and each one has its own unique elements. Hence why I strongly believe in the fact that independent studios should be given more of a chance in the entertainment industry. As you can see currently, some of the stuff Zako and I have mentioned are arguably more popular than the things that were produced by AAA studios and Hollywood level stuff. As for the soundtracks, while they may not be as consistent as those from bigger studios, the ones featured in indie projects definitely need more recognition than it already has. Show some love to the composers that work tirelessly to make tracks that, whether you realize it or not, play a significant role in shaping how we set a tone for a gameplay segment or a scene in film. So give these composers the recognition they deserve for their hard work in creating a true hidden gem of an art form. Hey everyone, while the credits are rolling over here, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching this long video. The process of making it is far longer, of course, which took us around a month. And during that 1 month, I had the great opportunity to work with a lot of great people. First off, of course, Zako Ze Wacko, who narrated, edited, and of course written a part of his own, which is the soundtracks in indie games. And then a friend of mine, Player Faiz, actually co-wrote the script, especially in the beginning part and where the direction is heading. And one more mention is my good friend Nara, who helped create the wonderful artwork that I used for the thumbnail. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching. Happy New Year, and if this video does well, see you later.